Today I will tell you a story that begins on the day after Christmas, a night when my only son left me stranded in the rain, muttering under his breath that I should be left out there. His car vanished into the night, swallowed by the storm. My son's pride blinded him, but I was not abandoned. The quiet headlights that appeared behind me became my answer. That night he made his last mistake. Remember to like this video, subscribe, and join our circle of grandma life stories. Tales of dignity, resilience, and the quiet strength that no storm can wash away. My name is Evelyn Harris. I am 63 years old, a widow, and I live in a red brick house on the outskirts of Minneapolis. The house itself is modest, built in the 1940s, but to me it is sacred. Every brick carries the memory of my husband, Richard. We spent 38 years together before he passed away. Since then, I have lived alone, holding on to the rituals that give me structure, purpose, and a sense of him still near. Each morning, I rise before dawn and put the kettle on. The hiss of water turning to steam, the scent of Earl Grey filling the kitchen. It is my way of starting the day in quiet reflection. I pour the tea into a porcelain cup with a crack along the rim. Richard once chipped it while rushing to set the table for Sunday dinner. I never replaced it. Some flaws are too precious to erase. After breakfast, I sit at the oak desk by the window, a desk polished by years of use. I open my leather-bound journal and write. Sometimes it is only a line, a thought, a memory, a scripture. Other times it becomes pages, my fears, my hopes, my prayers. Writing steadies me. It keeps me from drowning in silence. By afternoon, I put on my boots and walk into the garden, even when snow lies heavy on the roses. Richard planted those roses on our 25th anniversary. He told me they would outlive us both, if only someone cared for them. So I prune carefully, even in winter, brushing snow from branches as if tucking children in at night. Evenings are for cooking. Richard loved roast chicken with rosemary and thyme. I still make it once a week. The kitchen fills with the crackle of herbs in hot oil, with the fragrance that clings to my hair long after I sit down to eat alone. People sometimes ask why I bother. I say it is not about food, it is about memory, about keeping a place at the table for the man I loved. That was my life. Simple, steady, stitched together by small rituals. Until my son Daniel came home for Christmas. Daniel is 38, tall, broad-shouldered, with the sharp suits and sharp words of a man determined to prove himself. He works in finance in Chicago, and when he walks into a room, he makes sure everyone notices. He tells stories of meetings on the top floors of glass towers, of deals closed over expensive wine, of colleagues who envy his success. To the world, he is polished. To me, he is still the boy who once fell asleep on my lap in church, clutching his toy car. But success has hardened him. He looks at me and does not see his mother. He sees a liability. He thinks I am weak, careless, in need of his control. On Christmas Day, the house was full of noise. Ella, my niece who works at the local bank, brought cookies and laughter. Sister Margaret from the parish stopped by with carols and her gentle presence. The living room glowed with the lights Richard strung years ago, still blinking in red and gold. I watched Daniel smile at everyone, play the gracious host, pour wine with a steady hand, but behind his smile, I saw strain. His eyes were restless, darting to his phone, waiting for messages he would not explain. That night, after the guests left, Daniel gave me a box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a brand new phone. It was sleek, expensive, already set up. When I turned it on, I saw only one contact saved, his number. He smiled and said, "This way, Mother, you will not get confused. If you need anything, you call me. That is all you will ever need." His words were polished with affection, but they left a bitter taste. It was not a gift, it was a leash. The day after Christmas, the storm began. Rain poured from a sky heavy with melting snow. The streets shone with water, black and slick. Daniel insisted on driving me into town for errands. I sat in the back seat of his SUV, the leather cold against my hands. I carried my journal with me, tucked in my purse, as I always did. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm. Daniel spoke without looking at me. "Mother, we need to talk seriously. You cannot keep wasting money. Garden repairs, donations to the church, little projects that mean nothing in the long run. I manage the family's future now. You should learn to trust me. You should learn respect." The word respect hung in the air like smoke. To Daniel, respect meant silence, obedience. It meant giving him control over everything Richard and I had built together. I looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the world into watercolor shadows. My reflection stared back at me, lines etched deep, eyes still sharp. I did not answer. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw worked as though he were biting back anger. "You think I do not see it? You writing in that journal? You wandering in that garden like it matters? Mother, these things are childish. They cost money, time, energy. I am the one carrying the family now. You need to remember your place, my place." The words cut, yet I did not raise my voice. I have learned that silence can be sharper than shouting. The car veered off the highway into a deserted rest stop. The place looked abandoned, cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through, windows boarded up. Rain hammered the roof. Daniel slammed the gear into park. "Get out," he said. His tone was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse. "A long walk in the rain might teach you to respect me." "You will remember who is in charge." I stared at him. His face was lit by the dashboard glow, hard lines carved by ambition and fear. He thought this was strength, but I saw the desperation beneath. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, slicing through my coat. Rain struck my face, sharp as needles. I stepped out. The ground was slick, the smell of wet earth rising with each drop. The door slammed behind me. The SUV pulled away, red tail lights fading into the storm. The sound of tires hissing on wet pavement grew distant, then vanished. I stood alone in the rain, clutching my purse, water dripping down my hair, the night pressing close. For a moment the world was silent except for the storm, and in that silence I felt not fear, but clarity. Because I knew something Daniel did not. I was not abandoned. Within moments I saw them, the faint glow of headlights cutting through the downpour, not harsh, like Daniel's SUV, softer, warmer. They slowed as they approached. A sedan, old and steady, came to a stop. The driver's door opened. Mr. Whitaker, my neighbor, stepped out with an umbrella in hand, his white hair plastered by the rain, his coat soaked. He looked at me, eyes filled with sorrow and resolve. "Evelyn," he said, voice firm against the storm. I heard every word. His pride blinded him, but we will not let this go. This is the beginning, not the end. In his hand, I noticed a small recorder, its red light still blinking. The storm could not drown out Daniel's voice, captured forever. I stepped into Whitaker's car. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint scent of tea. On the back seat sat a small thermos. Whitaker smiled faintly. "I always bring tea on nights like this. Seems you and I share habits." As the rain pounded on the roof, I held my damp journal close. Richard's voice seemed to whisper through the storm. "Do not let anyone diminish you, Evelyn. Not even your own son." That night, Daniel believed he had given me a lesson in respect, but the truth was different. That night marked the first step toward his own downfall. The tires screeched against the broken pavement as Daniel pulled the SUV into a desolate rest stop. Cracked asphalt spread like a spider web beneath the headlights. Weeds thrust themselves through the concrete as if even the ground had been abandoned long ago. The rain had turned heavy, hammering the roof with a merciless rhythm. He stopped the car sharply and shifted into park. His hands rested on the steering wheel for a long moment before he finally turned to me, his voice calm but sharpened by something colder than anger. "Get out," he said. "A long walk in the rain will teach you respect. You will remember who carries this family. You will remember your place." The words settled in the air between us, cutting deeper than the storm outside. I looked at him carefully, the glow of the dashboard drawing harsh shadows across his face. His jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles pale against the wheel. For years, I had listened to that voice, sometimes sweet, sometimes convincing, but always pulling at the edges of my freedom. Tonight, it had stripped itself bare. No affection, no excuses, just control laid open. I placed my hand on the door handle. My palm felt cold against the metal. Rain pounded harder, as if the sky itself wanted to drown out the silence between us. I did not plead. I did not raise my voice. I knew better than to give him the satisfaction of fear. "You believe this is respect, Daniel?" I asked softly, my eyes never leaving his. His lips curved in a tight smile, almost pitying. "It is the only way you will learn." I pushed the door open. The wind rushed in, slicing through the warmth of the car. My breath fogged in the air as I stepped down onto the slick pavement. The rain struck my face with icy fingers, soaking through my coat in seconds. Behind me, the heavy door slammed shut, a sharp finality. The engine revved, and without another word, his car rolled forward. Red taillights glowed like burning eyes before they disappeared into the darkness. The sound of tires on wet asphalt grew faint, leaving me alone with nothing but the hiss of the storm. I stood there, water streaming down my cheeks, my hair plastered against my face. For a moment, the night seemed to press against me with its weight. The storm soaked not only my coat, but every memory of my son's laughter as a child, every warm Christmas morning when he would sit by the tree waiting for Richard to hand him a gift. That boy was gone. What remained was a man who believed cruelty could disguise itself as strength. Yet I did not panic. I had sensed this night would come. A mother always knows when her child's pride turns into something dangerous. For weeks I had seen the cracks, the tense calls he refused to explain, the sudden anger when I asked about the bank accounts, the gift of a phone that was more chain than kindness. Every detail had pointed toward this storm. I clutched my purse tighter. Inside it, my leather journal lay safe, its pages filled with notes, suspicions, even the words Richard had left me years ago. That journal was not just a habit. It was my memory against his gaslighting, my truth against his rewritten stories. The rain blurred my vision, but I kept my back straight. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange calm. I thought of Richard's voice, low and steady from the last letter he had written before he died. "Do not let anyone convince you that you are small, Evelyn. Even love, when twisted, can be used as a chain. Break it if you must." As the storm whipped around me, I realized I was not small, not broken. I was standing in the middle of the lesson Daniel thought he was teaching me. But it was he who would learn. I began to walk across the cracked lot. Each step splashed water around my boots. The air smelled of wet soil, sharp and metallic, like iron. My breath came steady, visible in clouds. The world was empty, but I felt a quiet certainty grow inside me. People imagine that when betrayal comes, it crushes you. Sometimes it does, but other times it clears the fog, strips away every excuse you once made for someone you loved. Standing in the rain, I saw Daniel not as my son for the first time, but as a man who had chosen to use cruelty as his language. That clarity is painful. It cuts deeper than any storm, but it also frees you. I paused, listening. The storm carried sounds far and near, but in the distance I heard it. The low hum of an engine. Headlights pierced the rain, softer, steadier than Daniel's SUV. They slowed as they drew near, casting a glow across the fractured asphalt. The car came to a stop a few yards away. The driver's door opened. Through the curtain of rain, I saw a familiar figure step out, umbrella in hand. Mr. Whitaker, my neighbor, his white hair plastered to his forehead, his coat already soaked through. He approached quickly, his shoes splashing in puddles, his voice firm over the storm. "Evelyn, he has gone too far. I was behind you, parked near the old gas station. I heard every word. I have it all." In his hand, the small recorder blinked with a red light. Daniel's voice, his arrogance, his threats, captured forever. Relief did not flood me. Instead, a deep steadiness settled into my bones, the kind of steadiness that comes when the truth no longer hides in shadows. I stepped under Whitaker's umbrella, the rain muffled against the fabric. "You should not have been out here alone," he said, shaking his head. "I was never alone," I replied, my voice low but certain. We walked to his car, an old sedan humming with warmth. Inside, the heater rattled softly. On the back seat sat a thermos. He handed it to me. "Tea. I never drive without it." I unscrewed the lid, steam curling upward. The scent of black tea filled the space, blending with the dampness of rain-soaked coats. I cupped it in my hands, the heat seeping into my skin. For a moment, I closed my eyes and allowed myself a breath. Daniel thought abandoning me would teach obedience. Instead, he handed me the clearest proof of who he had become. As we drove away from the desolate lot, rain streaking across the windshield, Whitaker spoke again. "Evelyn, this isn't just a family argument. This is abuse. This is control. And now we have the evidence." I nodded. My reflection flickered in the side window. A woman soaked to the bone, hair clinging to her face, eyes sharp with resolve. Not a victim, not a lesson to be taught. When betrayal comes, there is a choice. Collapse beneath it, or stand and let it reveal what you already knew deep inside. I chose the latter. That night in the rain was not the end of my dignity. Through the curtain of rain, a pair of headlights drew closer, softer than Daniel's harsh SUV beams, steady and deliberate, as if they belonged to someone who understood storms rather than feared them. I stood perfectly still, water soaking, through to my skin, my pulse steady but my breath sharp in my chest. The car slowed and rolled to a gentle stop a few feet from where I stood. An old sedan, its paint dulled with age but dependable, the kind of car that kept running not because it was new, but because its owner cared for it. The door opened and out stepped Mr. Whitaker. His white hair clung to his forehead, rain dripping from his glasses. He had lived 2 houses down since before Daniel was born, once a respected attorney in Minneapolis, and a friend to my late husband Richard. He carried an umbrella, though the storm had already soaked him through. His voice carried over the rain, firm but touched with the tremor of outrage. "Evelyn," he said, striding toward me, "this has gone too far." I felt the cold weight of the night lift just a fraction. He reached into the pocket of his coat and held out a small recorder, its red light still glowing. I followed far enough behind to hear every word. "Your son, your own son, thought this was a lesson. I caught it all." For a moment, the rain drowned out every sound except the blood in my ears. I looked at the device in his hand, tiny, unassuming, yet heavy with truth. Daniel's words lived inside it now, sharp, humiliating, undeniable. I nodded slowly, stepping under the umbrella he tilted toward me. My voice came out steady, though my heart twisted. "Thank you, Whitaker." Tonight the storm gave me more than rain. It gave me proof we walked together to his sedan, the wind pushing against us, forcing us to lean into it. The car door groaned as he opened it for me. Inside, the smell of damp upholstery mixed with something warmer. On the back seat sat a thermos, wrapped in a cloth napkin. "Still carrying tea?" I asked softly as I slid in, droplets sliding down my cheeks and onto my lap. He smiled faintly, shaking his head at himself. Old habits die hard. Black tea, strong. I never drive without it. I wrapped my chilled hands around the thermos when he passed it forward, steam curling upward when I unscrewed the lid. The scent filled the space, mingling with the muted sound of rain striking the roof. That small ritual, two older souls with tea between us in the middle of a storm, felt like a defiance as strong as any battle plan. Sitting there, with the heater rattling and Whitaker wiping his glasses with a handkerchief, I felt the storm inside me calm just a little. I had not been abandoned. I had not been erased. Even if Daniel thought he had the power to decide my worth, the truth sat here with me in the form of a blinking red recorder and a neighbor who refused to turn away. Whitaker adjusted his glasses and turned to me, his voice quiet now. You know what this means, Evelyn. This isn't just cruelty. It's evidence. If he's willing to do this to his own mother, what else has he done with your affairs? With Richard's estate? I tightened my grip on the thermos. My reflection in the side mirror looked back at me, a woman drenched and weary, but with eyes that no storm could wash out. I've suspected for months, I admitted. The missing money, the pressure to sign papers I didn't fully understand, the phone he gave me with only his number. Richard warned me, years ago. He told me Daniel's hunger for approval could twist into something darker. Whitaker leaned back, watching me carefully. Most people would crumble after what just happened. I shook my head slowly. Crumbling teaches nothing. I will not give him that gift. Tonight he believes he has broken me, but what he has given me is clarity. The rain drummed harder on the roof, like applause for a revelation spoken too softly to be heard by anyone else. For a while, neither of us spoke. I sipped the hot tea, feeling warmth seep into the cracks of my cold bones. My mind replayed Daniel's words, respect, control, burden, all wrapped in the tone of a son who believed he was saving face, saving legacy, saving himself. The irony was bitter. He thought he was teaching me to submit, but in truth, he was teaching me who he had become. Finally, Whitaker broke the silence. Do you want to press charges immediately? We can take this straight to the authorities. I turned the thermos in my hands, watching the steam coil upward. Not yet. Evidence is strongest when it tells a whole story. Tonight, I have the first chapter. I will let him believe I am quiet, that I am cowed. And while he celebrates his power, I will be writing the rest. Whitaker studied me for a moment, then nodded with a kind of respect men rarely show unless they mean it. Richard would be proud of that resolve. The mention of Richard's name brought a sudden tightness to my throat. My late husband's absence was a constant shadow, but his foresight had left me threads to follow. Journals, letters, reminders of values he wanted me to guard. Now, in the storm's fury, I felt those threads weaving tighter, binding me not in weakness but in purpose. I whispered, almost to myself, Richard told me never to let anyone make me small, even if that someone was our own child. The wipers squealed across the windshield as Whitaker started the engine. The old sedan rumbled forward, headlights cutting a path through the sheets of rain. We drove in silence, but it was not an empty silence. It was the kind that allowed thoughts to grow heavy, the kind that shapes a plan. I glanced at the recorder lying on the dashboard, its red light still blinking softly. Proof. Small but undeniable. My heart ached, but it was not despair. It was the ache of a wound that would no longer be ignored. As the town lights flickered in the distance, I knew this night was not about humiliation. It was about awakening. Daniel believed he had orchestrated the perfect lesson, that leaving me stranded in the rain would carve obedience into my bones. But he had underestimated the resilience of a woman who had walked through storms far worse than his pride. I rested my hand on the thermos, its warmth steady in my palm. A small ritual, yes, but also a symbol. We endure storms not by shouting into the wind, but by holding fast to the quiet things that keep us human. A cup of tea, a friend who shows up, the courage to face the rain without bowing. And so, as we left that desolate lot behind, I carried no shame, only resolve. Daniel had abandoned me to teach respect. Instead, he had written the opening line of his own downfall. The morning after the storm, I stepped back into my house, the red brick walls standing firm against the cold drizzle outside. Yet inside, the silence carried a weight I could not ignore. The Christmas lights still blinked faintly along the eaves, their cheer now hollow. On the dining table sat the gift Daniel had left me, a box wrapped in silver paper, the bow slightly crooked as if placed in haste. I untied it carefully, not out of excitement, but with the heaviness of knowing my son's gifts were rarely what they seemed. Inside lay a sleek, new phone. Its screen glowed to life with one contact already installed. Daniel's number. Only Daniel's. No address book, no apps, no history. Just him. It looked like generosity, but it reeked of control. A device meant to tether me, to ensure every call I made and every answer I gave went through him. A leash disguised as care. I set it back into the box and pushed it aside. The phone seemed to hum with quiet authority, a silent reminder of the lesson he believed he had delivered the night before. But my heart was not shaken. The night had already taught me more than he realized. As I moved through the house, I passed the shelf where Richard's framed photograph stood. His smile in that picture, taken on the day he retired, was one of ease, pride, and quiet faith. I paused, my fingers brushing the glass. "You knew, didn't you, Richard?" I whispered. "You always sensed what Daniel might become." The knock at the door came softly, almost hesitant. I opened it to see Ella, my niece, barely 24, with a banker's sharp eye but a heart still tender. She stepped inside, her coat damp with mist, her arms full of folders bound with string. "Aunt Evelyn," she said, lowering her voice, as though the walls themselves might betray her. "I thought you needed to see this." She spread the papers across the kitchen table. The smell of wet paper mingled with the faint aroma of the rosemary I had crushed the night before. My eyes scanned the documents quickly. Withdrawal slips, account transfers. Each line bore Daniel's signature. Ella tapped her finger against the page. "Every one of these says it's for family care. That should mean medical bills, home repairs, donations to the church, even your garden upkeep. But the money isn't here. It's being routed into a trust in Delaware." Under his name, I leaned back in my chair, my palms pressing flat against the wood, grain of the table, the numbers, the dates. They painted a story clearer than any confession. I looked up at her. "How much?" "Nearly 400,000 so far, all moved in the last year. And the pattern isn't random. It's structured, monthly, consistent. He's building something off the books." Ella's eyes brimmed with worry, though her voice carried a kind of righteous anger. "He's using the phrase family care like a shield. But this isn't for you. It isn't for anyone but him." The words didn't pierce me like a fresh wound. They landed with the heaviness of a truth I had already braced for. I folded the paper slowly, the crinkle loud in the quiet kitchen. "I am not shocked," I admitted. "I felt this shadow for months. But to see it on paper, this is different. This is no longer suspicion. It is evidence." Ella sat down across from me, her breath fogging the edge of the table, as though even the room was cold to her discovery. "What will you do, Aunt Evelyn?" I let the question settle in the air as I wrapped my fingers around the mug of tea I had poured before she arrived. The steam curled upward, warm against my face. "I will not confront him yet." Not directly. Men who wield control through appearances always believe they are untouchable. If I challenge him now, he will erase the trail. But if I let him continue, he will write his own indictment. Ella frowned, her youth eager for swift justice. "So you'll wait?" "Not wait," I corrected gently, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. Prepare. I thought back to the night before, the rain lashing against my coat, Daniel's voice slicing through the darkness with the arrogance of a man who thought he was teaching me respect. Yet, in his pride, he had given me the first stone to build my wall of truth. Now Ella had placed another in my hand. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the rest of the files. I shouldn't even have access to all of this. If the bank knew I was helping, it could cost me my job. I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. You've done more than you know. You've given me a mirror, Ella. And sometimes when the mirror shows you what's hiding in the dark, you don't look away. You find your light. Her lips pressed together, the lines of conflict softening on her young face. I don't understand how he could do this to you. To family, neither did I. Not fully. But as I looked again at Richard's photograph on the shelf, I realized perhaps it was never about me. Daniel's war was with himself, with the fear of failure he carried like a brand, and in his desperation to appear powerful, he had chosen the cruelest battlefield, his own blood. I turned back to the documents, tracing the ink with my fingertip. The cracks have always been here. We simply painted over them each year with holiday dinners, with presents, with polite words. Now the rain has come, and the paint has washed away. We see the house for what it is. Ella exhaled, her breath trembling. Do you hate him for it? I paused before answering. Hate was too simple a word. I felt grief, anger, disappointment, but also a strange, detached clarity. No, I said slowly. Hating him would mean he still holds me hostage. What I feel is resolve. He has chosen his path, and now I must choose mine outside. The rain continued its soft tapping against the window pane, as though reminding me of last night's storm and the lesson hidden inside it. Daniel thought abandonment could teach me humility. Instead, it taught me that I was not alone. That truth had allies, in neighbors, in nieces, in the quiet persistence of justice. As Ella left, she paused in the doorway, her voice low. You're stronger than anyone realizes, Aunt Evelyn. I watched her disappear into the misty morning, her figure small against the gray sky. I closed the door and leaned against it, the weight of both the gift box and the files heavy on my shoulders. The phone Daniel had given me still sat on the table, its screen black, but its silence loud. I picked it up, held it for a long moment, then set it back down face down. It would not control me. Not anymore. That morning, in the stillness of my kitchen, I felt my eyes harden, not with shock, but with clarity. The cracks in my family were no longer invisible, and once you see a crack, you cannot pretend the wall is whole. You decide whether to let it collapse or to rebuild it stronger than before. The snow had turned to slush by the time I reached St. Mary's. Each step across the icy pavement echoed with a weight that felt older than me, older than the church itself. The bell tower tolled overhead, each strike pealing against the gray sky like a reminder that time keeps its own pace, regardless of the storms inside our lives. I pulled my scarf tighter and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The scent of wax, incense, and cold stone greeted me like an embrace I hadn't realized I needed. Inside, Sister Margaret stood near the altar, her hands clasped loosely in prayer. She was older now, hair silvered like frost on winter branches, but her posture still carried the steadiness I remembered from decades of Christmas services. She turned when she heard my steps, her eyes soft but piercing. Evelyn, she said gently, walking toward me, you look like a woman who has already fought half the battle. I almost laughed, though nothing felt funny. Or perhaps like a woman who has just begun. She led me to a small side chamber, warmer, with a single lamp glowing against the shadows. From a locked drawer, she produced a thick envelope sealed with red wax. She placed it in my hands, the weight of it more than just paper. Richard left this with me, she said, years ago. He told me to give it to you only if you ever felt pressed by your own family, if the burden of trust became too heavy. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside, folded with care, were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a copy of the deed to our house, and a leather-bound notebook filled with financial notes in Richard's tidy script. I traced the familiar strokes of his pen, my heart tightening at the thought that he had foreseen what I had not wanted to admit. The letter was short, but every word carried the weight of foresight. Richard wrote of his pride in Daniel, but also his fear, that ambition unchecked could devour the very love it sought to honor. He wrote, "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then Daniel has chosen power over family. Do not surrender. Protect what we built together for yourself and for the dignity of what we stood for." I held the paper close, my tears silent. Sister Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder. "He trusted you more than anyone. He knew this day might come." The church bells rang again, outside, muffled now, but their rhythm seemed to match the beat of my heart. I tucked the letter back into the envelope, breathing in the cool air that smelled faintly of cedar and old hymns. That night, back in my living room, the fire crackled low, throwing long shadows against the brick walls. I sat with the envelope before me, the documents spread out like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Then came the knock on the door. I knew the rhythm instantly, 3 short, 2 long. Mr. Whitaker. I let him in, and he carried the same recorder I had seen the night before, the red light blinking like a warning beacon. Without a word, he pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, sharp, confident, and cruelly calm. My mother needs to learn who is in control. She wastes money on sentiment, on things that mean nothing. If I take everything under my name, she'll have no choice but to respect me. Sometimes you have to be cruel for the greater good. The words sliced through the stillness, each syllable a wound. Whitaker stopped the recording, his eyes steady on mine. "Evelyn, this isn't just a family argument. This is emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and coercion. In the eyes of the law, it is not love, it is harm." I clasped my hands in my lap, feeling the tremor of my own pulse. I had raised Daniel, fed him, held him through his illnesses, taught him the prayers his father loved, and now, here he was, recorded on tape, stripping away every pretense of care. Whitaker leaned forward. "Do you understand what this means?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice colder than I intended. "It means Richard was right. Daniel's ambition is no longer hidden. It is documented. Plain for anyone to see. Whitaker poured tea from the kettle I had left on the stove. The steam curled upward, mingling with the smell of smoke from the fireplace. He placed the cup before me with a gentleness that contrasted with the gravity of his words. "You are not alone in this fight. You have me, Ella, Sister Margaret, and you have Richard's foresight. We will not let Daniel strip you of what is yours." I took a sip, the warmth steadying my hands. "What would you do if you were me?" He paused, his gaze steady but kind. "I would not act rashly. Men like Daniel thrive on confrontation. They want you to argue, to rage, to stumble into mistakes. But if you gather your evidence quietly, if you wait until the light shines in full, he cannot escape it. The law may be slow, Evelyn, but it is not blind." I nodded slowly, letting his words settle inside me. It was not comfort I felt, but clarity. Daniel believed his cruelty was a lesson, that leaving me in the rain would bend me into submission. But each act of cruelty was carving a record against him, one stone at a time, building the wall that would eventually enclose him. Later that night, when Whitaker had left and the house was once more quiet, I sat at my writing desk. The envelope lay open, Richard's handwriting a beacon in the dim lamplight. I opened my leather journal, the one where I had written daily since his death, and copied down his words, not as proof but as reminder. "Do not surrender. I listened to the wind outside, the branches scraping against the windows, and I realized something profound. Families break not only from betrayal, but from silence, from the choice to look away. Tonight, I chose not to look away. Daniel thought he had isolated me, that a single phone with his number alone could tether me like a child. But in truth, his very arrogance was what brought my allies closer. Whitaker with his recorder, Ella with her papers, Sister Margaret with Richard's final letter. I extinguished the lamp, whispering into the shadows, "Richard, I will not fail you, and I will not let him destroy what we built." The fire burned low, embers glowing like small eyes in the hearth. I closed my journal and laid my pen aside. The battle had begun, but for the first time, I did not feel fear. I felt resolve. The following evening, I lit only one lamp in the living room, letting its amber glow stretch shadows across the walls Richard once painted himself. The quiet of the house carried a weight, broken only by the ticking of the clock above the mantel. I sat with my journal open on my lap, though I had written nothing yet. My hand rested on the pen, steady, waiting. I knew he would come. Men like Daniel cannot resist claiming what they believe is already theirs. The front door opened without a knock. Daniel stepped inside as though the house belonged to him. His shoes clicked against the wooden floor, slow and deliberate, echoing with the certainty of ownership. He didn't remove his coat, though drops of melted snow clung to the shoulders. His eyes roamed over the living room, the framed photographs, the bookshelf, the fire now reduced to embers, like a man inspecting his property. Without asking, he lowered himself into Richard's old chair, the heavy oak one near the window. My husband had always sat there to read, his posture dignified, yet relaxed. Seeing Daniel claim it made something inside me tighten. It was not simply disrespect, it was erasure. He folded his hands and leaned back, the picture of confidence. "Mother," he began, his tone smooth, rehearsed, "I've been thinking about what's best for you. For all of us, really. It's time we put things in order." I kept my gaze on him, my voice calm. "What kind of order do you mean, Daniel?" His lips curved in a polite smile that never reached his eyes. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, sliding it across the table between us. "These are transfer papers. Once you sign, the house and the remaining accounts will be under my name. Legally, it makes everything simpler. You can stay here, of course, but without the burden of management. You'll be free to just live." I looked down at the folder but did not touch it. The paper inside seemed to hum with arrogance. He mistook control for kindness, coercion for care. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if speaking to a child. "You don't need to worry about responsibilities anymore. I'll handle everything. You can enjoy the garden, your books, your little rituals, but you won't have to make decisions that could harm what Father left behind." The words pricked like needles. "My little rituals," I repeated softly, almost to myself. "That's what you call them." Daniel's smile widened, satisfied. "Exactly. Mother, you've worked hard enough. Let me protect the legacy. Trust me." I raised my eyes to his, unflinching. My voice, when it came, was level, quiet, but it carried the weight of something immovable. "Daniel, respect does not come from taking. It cannot be forced by signatures or sealed with threats. Respect is earned, and it is lost when a son tries to strip his mother of her dignity." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. The clock ticked louder, the embers hissed in the fireplace. Then Daniel laughed, low, sharp, dismissive. The sound chilled the air, bouncing off the walls until it seemed even the house recoiled. "You think this is about dignity?" he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think keeping old habits alive, wasting money on gardens and donations, is what Father would have wanted? You're naive, Mother. Father built something valuable, and you're throwing it away piece by piece. If you truly respected him, you'd sign. If you respected me, you'd stop fighting. I felt the sting of his words, but beneath them, I heard the trembling edge of desperation. A man pressed by failure speaks loudest when he fears silence will expose him. I folded my journal closed and set the pen on top. Richard wanted this house to be more than bricks. He wanted it to be memory, community, family. And you believe by stamping your name on a piece of paper, you will own that? No, Daniel. You can own the walls, but you will never own what they stand for. His jaw tightened, and his fingers drummed impatiently on the folder. For the first time, his composure cracked, revealing the edge of something frantic underneath. You don't understand what I'm carrying. The debts, the deals, the eyes on me every day waiting for me to prove I'm better than him. If I don't control this, I lose everything. Do you want to see me humiliated? Do you want me destroyed? The rawness in his voice almost softened me, almost pulled at the part of me that remembered holding him as a child. But cruelty wrapped in desperation is still cruelty. My heart could ache for him, but my resolve did not falter. You've already begun destroying yourself, Daniel, I said evenly, not with debts, but with pride. He pushed the folder toward me again, the papers sliding across the table. Sign it. If you don't, you'll regret it. You'll find out just how much worse things can get. The threat lingered in the room like smoke. I let the silence answer him, refusing to give him either the satisfaction of fear or the ammunition of argument. Finally, he stood, shoving the papers back into his briefcase with a violent snap. He straightened his coat, his face once more composed, though his eyes burned with resentment. You'll regret this, Mother. Don't say I didn't give you the chance. He walked out without another word, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. I sat alone in the living room, the lamp still burning, the fire nearly out. My heart was steady, though the echo of his laughter still clung to the walls. I picked up my journal and wrote only one line. Respect cannot be stolen. It can only be lost. The air smelled faintly of smoke and paper. I pressed my hand to Richard's chair where Daniel had sat so confidently minutes earlier. The wood felt cold under my palm, but my grip was firm. He might claim the seat, but the spirit that filled it was not his to inherit. That night, the house did not feel empty. It felt alive with defiance, with quiet strength. Daniel believed he had cornered me. What he did not realize was that every word, every threat, every laugh was becoming the very evidence that would one day undo him. And as I closed my journal, I knew this was not just a battle between mother and son. It was the unveiling of truth. It was Ella who first uncovered the thread. She came to me one afternoon with her satchel heavy with documents, her cheeks flushed from both the cold and the weight of what she carried. She didn't even take off her coat before spreading the papers across my kitchen table. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out one file after another, pages lined with signatures that bore Daniel's name. But next to them was another signature I had not seen in years. "Aunt Evelyn," she whispered, her voice taut. "He's not working alone. He's using Alan." The name struck me like a sudden wind. Alan Barker, once Richard's business partner. I remembered him from dinners long ago, a man who laughed too loudly, who always had a story of some opportunity just out of reach. Richard had trusted him once, but trust had a way of souring when ambition fermented into desperation. After Richard's death, Alan vanished from our lives, buried in debts and lawsuits I only heard about in whispers. I looked down at the documents. Alan's signature was there, beside Daniel's, on papers crafted to look legitimate. Transfers, shell companies, investments with no real weight behind them. Together they had created a labyrinth, each wall designed to conceal the truth. Daniel was moving our family's assets into places where light could not reach. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what I had already sensed. Daniel's arrogance had always been too polished, his confidence too rehearsed. Now I saw why. He had an accomplice, one who knew exactly how to bend paper into power. Ella leaned closer, her voice shaking. I checked the numbers 3 times. Alan is providing the fake valuations. Daniel is funneling the money through them. And the trust in Delaware? It's just one branch. He's building a network. I sat back, the kitchen chair groaning beneath me. My eyes traced the ink, the dates, the deliberate strokes. So he doesn't just want control of what Richard left me, I said softly. He wants to multiply it, to turn it into his empire. And he's willing to use fraud to do it. Ella's young face was tense with fear and loyalty. If the regulators ever find out, Daniel will drag you down with him. Everything is in your name first. That's how he hides it. Her words stung like icy water against my skin. The betrayal was not only in his intent to strip me of dignity, it was in the willingness to risk my entire life's foundation to prop up his collapsing pride. That night, I found myself walking back to St. Mary's. The snow had hardened into a slick crust, the air biting at my cheeks. I pushed the heavy doors open again, the quiet inside carrying me forward. Sister Margaret was there, her rosary dangling from her hands. She saw the envelope I still clutched against my chest and raised her eyes knowingly. I sat beside her, my voice low, almost breaking. It isn't just Daniel. He's joined with Alan. They've woven a net around me. Around everything Richard left, Margaret's eyes darkened, her hand covering mine. Then you must be careful, Evelyn. Networks built on deceit do not stand forever, but they can ensnare the innocent while they do. I looked at the candle flames flickering near the altar. They trembled with each breath of air, yet they did not go out. When the darkness grows too thick, I whispered almost to myself, I must be the small light. Margaret squeezed my hand, her voice steady. That is exactly what Richard saw in you. Do not let his foresight go to waste. I stayed in the church long after she left. The bells, tolling midnight. The silence pressed close, yet it was not empty. It was watchful. My heart beat with a resolve that felt unfamiliar but unshakable. Daniel thought his network made him untouchable, but the truth has a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls. When I returned home, Whitaker was waiting on the porch, his coat collar pulled high against the wind. He held the recorder in his hand again, the red light blinking softly. He's slipping, Evelyn, he said, his voice sharp against the night air. I have another recording. He spoke on the phone with Alan, said the words himself. Once she signs, we're free. Free. As if you were the prison, I felt my breath catch, my hands curling into fists. Not prison, I said, my voice cold. Shield. I was the shield Richard left, and Daniel resents that Whitaker's eyes softened, though his jaw remained tight. We'll build the case piece by piece, but you must hold your ground. Do not give him a single word he can twist. I nodded, the cold air burning my lungs. He wants me small, but every act of his arrogance gives me strength. Inside, I sat once more at my desk, the leather journal open before me. I wrote the words clearly, my hand steady despite the storm raging in my chest. When ambition becomes hunger, it devours even the hands that fed it. But hunger cannot last forever. Truth is not a feast, it is a flame. I placed Richard's letter beside my journal. The ink faded, but the message alive. He had known Daniel's shadow long before I had been willing to see it. Now I saw it clearly. It stretched not only across my house, but across the lives of anyone Daniel touched. I closed the journal, extinguished the lamp, and sat in the dark, listening to the whisper of wind against the windows. The house did not feel lonely. It felt like a watchtower, standing firm against a storm that would soon reveal its true size. Daniel had his network of lies. I had my network of truth. Ella with her courage, Whitaker with his recorder, Margaret with her faith, Richard with his foresight. The battle lines were drawn, though no one outside these walls yet knew it. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I whispered into the silence, "You will not break me, Daniel. Not with Alan's papers, not with threats, not with networks spun in darkness. I will be the light, however small, and it will be enough." The night rain returned as if summoned by memory. It lashed against the windows in violent sheets, each drop rattling against the glass like the ticking of 1,000 impatient clocks. I had just finished clearing away the dishes when I heard the sound of Daniel's car pulling up outside. The crunch of tires over gravel cut through the storm. I tightened the sash of my robe and carried my teacup into the hallway, bracing myself. The door opened without a knock. Daniel filled the frame, his hair damp, his eyes fierce. He stepped inside with a gust of cold air, bringing the storm with him. His coat dripped onto the rug Richard had bought in our first year of marriage. Without a word, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, shoving them toward me. "Sign it," he demanded, his voice sharp, almost cracking under its own weight. I looked down. Power of attorney. The bold letters on top stared back at me like iron bars. He had prepared this long before tonight. His jaw worked furiously as he shoved the papers closer. "It ends here, Mother. You'll stop fighting me. You'll give me authority to act. You'll be taken care of, but you will not stand in my way again." I raised my cup, took a slow sip of tea, and let the silence answer first. The storm howled against the walls, as though it too refused to yield. Finally, I placed the cup on the table and met his eyes. "No." His face darkened, lips curling into disbelief. "No? Respect," I said softly, "doesn't come from signatures, and it doesn't come from stripping away what is not yours." He stepped closer, the papers trembling in his hands. "Do you want me ruined? Do you want me to fail in front of everyone? You don't know what I'm holding together. I can't lose control. I won't." His desperation came through the cracks of his fury, raw and shaking. For a fleeting second, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who clung to Richard's hand in church, who trembled at thunderstorms. But the man before me was armored in arrogance, in fear masquerading as dominance. "Sign it," he shouted, slamming the papers down so hard the lamp flickered. I shook my head slowly. "You can take everything on paper, Daniel, but you'll never own what your father built in truth, and you will never own me." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. The sudden force startled me, my teacup tipping from the table. It shattered against the floor, porcelain fragments scattering across the rug. The sharp, ringing sound filled the house like an alarm. I froze, not from fear, but from memory. For a heartbeat, I was no longer in this storm, but in another winter years ago. Richard's hand brushing mine as he picked up the shards of a broken cup, his voice gentle. "It's only a cup, Evelyn. Don't let the breaking of small things break you." His smile had been steady then, reminding me that love meant mending, not controlling. The flashback vanished as Daniel's grip tightened. His face was inches from mine, his eyes wide, not just with anger, but with panic. I could feel the tremor in his hand. This was not the grasp of pure strength. It was the clutch of a drowning man, dragging down anyone within reach. I drew in a breath, steady, deliberate. "Let go, Daniel." For a moment he didn't move. His chest heaved, his eyes darting across my face as if searching for surrender. Then, with a violent jerk, he released me. He stepped back, his breathing ragged. The storm outside thundered, lightning splitting the sky and illuminating the room in a flash of white. His silhouette looked less like a man and more like a shadow unraveling. "You don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse, almost pleading. "I've already gone too far." "I can't stop. If I don't control this house, the accounts, everything, I lose everything. People will see me as weak. Do you want me humiliated?" His words spilled out like confession, but they carried no repentance, only terror of being seen for what he truly was. I bent down, gathering one shard of the shattered teacup, its edge sharp against my fingers. I held it in my palm and looked at him. Humiliation doesn't come from losing things, Daniel. It comes from losing yourself. He stared at me, chest rising and falling like he had run a marathon. His face twisted, torn between fury and despair. Then, with a growl, he swept the papers back into his briefcase, his movements clumsy, frantic. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking. "I gave you a chance. Don't expect another." He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. I remained in the silence that followed, the only sound the rain pelting the windows and the faint crackle of the fireplace. I knelt slowly, gathering the broken porcelain, my hands calm. Richard's words echoed in me again, steady as the beat of the clock. "Don't let the breaking of small things break you." I placed the shards gently into a bowl, each fragment reflecting a glimmer of light from the lamp. They were ruined, yes, but they were also proof. Proof that Daniel's control was slipping. Proof that his desperation was boiling over. And in that knowledge, I felt a strange kind of strength. I sat back on my heels, listening to the storm rage outside. Daniel thought tonight would break me, but all it did was reveal the truth. He was no longer simply greedy. He was cornered. Desperation, not power, drove him now. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered into the silence, "Richard, I will not let him destroy what you left. Not while I still have breath." The storm outside howled louder, but inside me there was calm, the kind that comes when you finally see the difference between power and weakness. Daniel's fury was weakness disguised. My refusal, that was strength. The storm of the previous night still lingered in the air the next morning. The clouds hung low, heavy, pressing against the earth as though reluctant to release their grip. I sat at the kitchen table with my journal closed, my pen resting across it, when the sound of a knock broke through the silence. It was sharp, insistent. When I opened the door, there stood Whitaker, his face pale but resolute, his coat buttoned tight against the chill. In his hands was a manila envelope, thick and worn, the corners bent from being carried too often. "I found something," he said, his voice low, steady but weighted with concern. He stepped inside, his shoes dripping onto the rug. We sat together at the table, the same place Ella had spread her documents only days before. With deliberate care, Whitaker pulled out the contents of the envelope and laid them before me. Loan agreements, promissory notes, contracts with signatures I knew too well, Daniel's, scrawled in bold strokes that tried to mask the tremor of haste. The papers smelled faintly of ink and old dust, and as I touched them, a shiver ran through me. Whitaker tapped one page. "These are from Texas." A real estate development project. Overstated, underfunded, destined to collapse. Daniel poured millions into it, money he didn't have. He's been covering the losses with what he took from you, but even that isn't enough. He's turned to loan sharks, Evelyn. Short-term, high interest, the kind that demand payment in ways far beyond paper. The words settled heavy in my chest. I had known desperation was driving him, but here it was, black and white, undeniable. Daniel had not been protecting me. He had been protecting his illusion. I picked up one document, the paper thin and fragile, yet it carried the weight of a man's downfall. "If he loses this project," I said quietly, "he loses everything. His title, his reputation, the facade he's built. That is why he's pressing me so hard, not because he loves me, but because he needs my signature to keep his tower of lies from falling." Whitaker nodded grimly. "His pride is his cage." He can't admit failure, so he claws at anything that might keep him standing, even if it means crushing you beneath him. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. For a moment, I closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my lids, I saw Richard's face, steady, calm, the way he used to be when the world weighed on me. I remembered one winter evening years ago when Richard came home with his shoulders slumped, his own business suffering from the market downturn. I had asked him then if he was afraid of losing everything. He smiled and said, "Evelyn, I can lose the work of my hands, but not the work of my heart. That no one can take." Opening my eyes, I looked at the pile of papers. Daniel had never learned that lesson. To him, loss of wealth meant loss of worth, and now he was drowning, dragging me with him to preserve an image that had never truly been his. Whitaker broke the silence. "These documents, they're more than evidence of fraud. They show intent. The courts will see it for what it is. But Evelyn, you must be careful. Desperate men are unpredictable. He is not thinking like a son anymore. He's thinking like a cornered wolf." I nodded slowly, my fingers resting on the edge of my journal. I see that now. His anger, his cruelty. It isn't only greed, it's fear. And fear can be more dangerous than hate. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had begun again, light but steady, the drops trailing down the glass like veins of silver. I could see the garden Richard and I had planted years ago. The roses were bare now, their branches stripped by winter, but I knew beneath the soil, life still waited. Renewal was always hidden before it was revealed. Turning back, I met Whitaker's eyes. He thinks he wears the mask of protector. But all he's protecting is his pride. He hides behind the words, "I'm taking care of Mother," while he steals from the very legacy Richard left us. And the tragedy is, he believes his lie. Whitaker's face softened, though his voice stayed firm. "What will you do?" I looked down at the documents, each one a shard of truth, sharp enough to cut through Daniel's deception. My hand brushed across them, and I felt a strange calm. I will not confront him in rage. Rage is his weapon, not mine. I will let him speak his lies louder until they echo so far that everyone hears them. And then, when the truth is placed beside them, he will have nothing left to hide behind. The kettle whistled faintly on the stove, and I rose to pour us both tea. The steam curled upward, carrying with it the scent of Earl Grey, mingling with the storm outside. As I set the cup before Whitaker, my hands were steady. "He thinks control is strength," I said, "but strength is choosing not to be controlled. That is what he will never understand." Whitaker raised his cup in quiet acknowledgement. "Richard chose wisely, Evelyn. You were always the one with steady hands." That night, after Whitaker left, I sat again by the fire with Richard's letter in my lap. The flames crackled, throwing warmth into the cold corners of the room. I reread his words, the ones he had written years before, foreseeing Daniel's ambition. "Do not surrender." I whispered aloud, "Richard, you saw what I refused to see, but I see it now, and I will not surrender." I pressed the letter back into the envelope and placed it beside my journal. Then I leaned back, listening to the rain, and I understood something profound. Daniel's tyranny was not born of pure malice. It was born of the terror of falling from the pedestal he had built for himself. And yet, understanding did not mean forgiveness. It meant I saw him clearly. A son blinded by pride can wound deeper than any enemy. But the truth, once revealed, becomes the salve and the sword. Tonight, I held both. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the mantel clock and the soft hiss of rain easing into mist outside. I sat by the window, my old leather journal open on my lap, the pen poised above the page. The lamplight cast a warm circle on the paper, while beyond the glass, the streetlight flickered against puddles that mirrored the night sky. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what I had seen these past days. Daniel's threats, his papers, his fury, Whitaker's evidence, Ella's discoveries, Richard's foresight, sealed in letters and documents, and through it all, the memory of Daniel as a boy refused to leave me. I closed my eyes, and in the quiet I saw him again. 5 years old, his small hand gripping mine tightly during the Christmas Eve service. The church had been lit by candles then, carols rising to the rafters. He had looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes and whispered, "Mama, don't let go." That memory pierced me sharper than any of his cruel words now. How had we walked from that night of innocence to this night of betrayal? I began to write. The pen moved steadily, ink flowing like blood from a wound that would not clot. Daniel, my son, I remember the way your hand felt in mine that Christmas long ago. I remember the way you laughed when snow fell heavy, the way you ran to your father's arms. I remember all of it. And still, I cannot let those memories blind me to the man you have become. My hand paused, and I lifted my gaze to Richard's picture on the shelf. His smile was patient, unwavering, as though he knew this moment would come. I whispered into the quiet room, "You saw him more clearly than I did, Richard. You knew pride could swallow him whole, and you trusted me to hold the line." The storm outside softened to drizzle, but the heaviness remained. I dipped the pen again and continued, "I cannot save you from the choices you've made, Daniel, and I will not surrender what you demand, because love, true love, does not mean yielding to destruction. I can love you as my son, but I cannot hand you my dignity, not mine, not your father's, not what we built together." As the words etched themselves onto the page, I felt both pain and clarity. Memories came unbidden. Daniel helping me string lights across the porch when he was 12, his laughter mixing with Richard's as they teased me for being too particular about the bulbs. Another Christmas when he was 16, sullen, his eyes already sharp with ambition, scoffing at gifts that were too small. The signs had been there, but I had softened them in my mind, smoothing his edges with hope. Now the edges cut deep. The fire in the hearth crackled low, the scent of smoke mixing with the faint aroma of the tea I had brewed but forgotten to drink. I wrote again, my strokes sharper this time. Compassion is not the same as surrender. Mercy is not the same as blindness. I will not let my love for you become the weapon you use to undo me. For Richard, for myself, for the dignity of this family, I will stand firm. I stopped, the pen hovering above the page. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me. An older woman, lines carved deep by grief and endurance, but with eyes that did not waver. The reflection seemed almost like Richard standing behind me, steadying me as he once did when storms rattled our windows. The floor creaked, a sound that pulled me back into the present. My heart stilled, wondering if Daniel had returned, but the house remained empty. The only movement was the curtain swaying gently with the draft. Even in silence, I could feel the shadow of his presence, lingering like smoke after a fire. I pressed my palm flat against the page and whispered, "You will not win, Daniel." Not this way. In that moment, I understood something with a clarity I had not before. Daniel's cruelty was not born of hatred. It was born of fear. Fear of being seen as small, as failing, as less than Richard. He cloaked that fear in authority, in threats, in papers demanding signatures. But fear leaves cracks, and cracks let the light through. I turned the page and wrote again, slower now, deliberate. I grieve for you, my son. I grieve for the boy who once held my hand and trusted me completely. But I will not grieve my own soul. I will not grieve Richard's legacy by handing it to your pride. I will keep it, not only for me, but for you, so that one day when the illusion shatters, you will see what you lost was never wealth, but the truth you tried so hard to bury. Tears blurred my vision, but I did not stop writing. My words were not only for Daniel, they were for myself, for the woman who had been told she was fragile, who'd been abandoned in the rain, who'd been told respect must be earned through submission. I drew a firm line under the last sentence and closed the journal. My hands pressed against the leather cover, warm from the heat of my palms. I sat back in the chair, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been trapped in me for years. The night air seeped in through the cracks of the window, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and winter pine. I listened to the sound of dripping water from the eaves, steady, patient. The world was reminding me, storms pass, but resolve must remain. I placed the journal on the table beside Richard's letter. Side by side, past and present rested together, two anchors holding me steady. My heart ached, yes, but it also burned with something sharper. Resolve. The kind Richard had carried, the kind I had once thought belonged only to men who fought battles in boardrooms and courts. Tonight I realized it belonged to me as well. I whispered into the quiet, "Love is not surrender. Dignity is not negotiable, and I will not be erased." Outside, the drizzle eased, the moon breaking through a crack in the clouds. Its pale light filtered through the window and fell across the journal, illuminating the words I had written. They gleamed faintly, like a vow carved in stone. And in that quiet moment, I knew the battle was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. The storm could rage again, my son could rage again, but my words, my resolve, and Richard's memory would not bend. The decision to go public was not made lightly. I sat with Ella in the dim light of my kitchen, the envelope of documents and Whitaker's recorder lying between us like sacred weapons. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence while rain tapped lightly against the window, the calm before another storm. Ella's eyes searched mine. "Are you sure, Aunt Evelyn?" "Once this is out, there's no turning back. Daniel will know it was you." I wrapped my hands around my tea, feeling the warmth steady my pulse. "He already knows I will never sign. He already sees me as his enemy. But the truth, if hidden, rots. It must be brought into the light." She nodded, though her lips pressed tight. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Within hours, we were seated across from Mark Halpern, an investigative journalist at the Minneapolis Herald. His office smelled of old paper and coffee that had cooled hours ago. He looked at me with cautious curiosity, as though trying to reconcile the quiet woman before him with the story Ella had hinted at. I slid the envelope across his desk. "Inside, you will find bank withdrawals, trust documents, signatures, and a loan trail that leads directly to Daniel Harris. He is my son, but he is also a man who has turned his ambition into a weapon against his own family." Mark opened the folder carefully, his eyes scanning quickly, stopping every few lines to reread. Then Ella placed the recorder on his desk and pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, his words sharp, undeniable. "Once she signs, we're free. Free from her sentimental nonsense. She'll have no choice but to respect me." The sound hung in the air long after the recording clicked off. Mark leaned back, his face pale. "This is more than a family dispute. This is abuse, fraud, possibly criminal conspiracy." "Yes," I said softly, "but more than that, it's truth. And the community deserves to see who he really is." The next morning, the paper ran the story. The headline cut through the quiet like a blade. "Financial director accused of exploiting mother, diverting family assets." Underneath, the article outlined Daniel's loans, his forged partnerships, and his attempts to seize control of my property. My name was there too, Evelyn Harris, widow of Richard Harris, not as victim, but as the woman who refused to be silenced. The phones began ringing before breakfast. Neighbors called, voices laced with shock and sympathy. Old friends from church left messages of outrage, their support steady but their disbelief raw. Even strangers reached out, their words heavy with judgment against Daniel. How could a son do this to his mother? I listened to each message in silence, my hands folded in my lap. It was not vindication I felt, but a hollow ache. No mother dreams of seeing her child exposed to the world in this way. Yet truth had its own justice, and justice rarely came without pain. That evening, Daniel stormed into the house. His face was flushed, his hair disheveled, his steps heavy enough to shake the floorboards. In his hand, he carried the newspaper, crumpled and wet from the rain. He threw it onto the coffee table, his voice a roar. "You did this! You made me into a joke. You turned me into a spectacle for this town to gawk at." I remained seated, my journal open beside me. "I didn't turn you into anything, Daniel. You wrote your own story. I simply refused to hide it." His eyes blazed with fury. He reached for the crystal vase on the mantel, a wedding gift from Richard's sister, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards scattering across the rug, catching the light like pieces of fallen stars. The sound reverberated through the house, echoing long after silence returned. "You think you've won?" He spat, his voice ragged. "You think the community will save you? You're nothing without me. I'm the only one carrying this family forward, and you just destroyed me. You will regret this, Mother. You'll lose everything you're clinging to." I rose slowly, the weight of my years steadying me like an anchor. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his rage. "No, Daniel. What I have is not yours to destroy. My dignity, my truth, Richard's memory, they are not in your grasp. They never were." For a moment, he froze. His breath came fast, his chest rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. In his eyes, I saw not only fury but fear, raw, trembling fear. The mask of control had slipped, and beneath it was the boy terrified of failure, terrified of being seen as small. But instead of admitting it, he turned that fear outward, twisting it into venom. "You'll see," he growled, his voice breaking. "When the dust settles, you'll be the one left with nothing." "Not me." He stormed out, the door slamming behind him with such force the windows rattled. The house fell quiet again, save for the sound of glass crunching beneath my slippers as I crossed the rug. I bent to gather the shards, each fragment cold and sharp in my hand. I thought of Richard, how he had once picked up broken pieces for me, telling me not to let small things break my spirit. As I dropped the shards into a bowl, I whispered, "This too will not break me." Later that night, I sat once more by the window, the rain easing into drizzle. Across the street, lights flickered in neighbors' houses, their warmth spilling out into the wet night. The community had seen Daniel's mask fall, and though it wounded me deeply to know he hated me for it, I felt a quiet certainty. I opened my journal and wrote, "Truth is a blade. It cuts the liar first, but it also wounds the one who wields it. Still, better the wound of truth than the poison of silence." The phone rang again. I let it ring, the sound blending with the rain. The world was shifting, and Daniel was unraveling. The board he thought he controlled had been overturned, and now every move he made would only tighten the net around him. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and cold stone, a place where voices carried too easily, and silence felt heavier than rain. I walked through its tall doors wearing Richard's old wool coat, the one he had bought me in our 20th year of marriage. Its seams were worn, but it wrapped around me like armor. Every step echoed across the marble floor, reminding me why I was there. The courtroom was already filling with people, Neighbors, journalists, curious strangers who had read the headlines. Some glanced at me with sympathy, others with curiosity, but I kept my eyes forward. At the far table sat Daniel, his suit sharp, his hair combed with precision, his expression carefully arranged into confidence. Beside him, a young lawyer straightened his tie, whispering strategy into his ear. I took my seat across from them, the weight of Richard's letter pressed against my chest inside the coat pocket. Ella sat behind me, her hands folded tightly, her presence steady as a lighthouse. Whitaker was there too, his briefcase brimming with papers and his recorder cupped like something sacred. The judge entered, his gavel striking once. The sound rang like thunder, silencing every whisper in the room. This court will now address the matter of Harris versus Harris, regarding allegations of elder financial abuse and fraudulent transfer of assets. My son didn't flinch at the words. He leaned back in his chair, lips curled faintly, as if he believed the whole proceeding beneath him. His lawyer rose first, voice smooth, rehearsed. Your Honor, my client is a devoted son, a man of impeccable standing in this community. Any claims against him stem from misunderstanding, from a grieving mother's mistrust. He has acted only to protect her. The judge's eyes flicked toward me. Then Whitaker rose, his voice rougher, more grounded. Your Honor, what we have here is not protection. It is coercion, manipulation, and calculated theft. The evidence will show Mr. Harris sought to strip his mother of her rights to cover debts of his own making. The first piece of evidence was presented, the recording. Daniel's voice filled the room again, clear and sharp. Once she signs, we're free. Free from her sentimental nonsense. She'll have no choice but to respect me. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer shifted uneasily, but Daniel himself stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as though defiance could drown out his own words. Then came the bank records Ella had unearthed. Transfers marked as family care, funneled instead into accounts tied to Delaware trusts. The judge flipped through them slowly, frowning deeper with each page. Finally, Whitaker placed Richard's letter before the bench. The judge read silently, his brow furrowing. The words, though written years ago, spoke with the clarity of foresight. If pride blinds our son, Evelyn will be the one to guard what we built. Trust her with all authority. When the judge looked up, the weight in his gaze was unmistakable. That was when Daniel snapped. He rose suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor. His lawyer tried to pull him back, but he shook him off. His voice thundered through the chamber. You don't understand. She's twisting everything. She's always resented me because Father trusted me more than her. She's lying. This is her revenge. His words poured out like poison, but each sentence only drew the noose tighter. The judge's pen moved quickly across his notes, his face hardening. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, though my heart pounded against my ribs. I did not answer Daniel's accusations with words. Silence was my shield. The more he raged, the more the court saw. Finally, the judge raised his hand, his voice stern. Mr. Harris, enough. This outburst only confirms what has been alleged. Coercion, intimidation, emotional abuse. The documents, recordings, and testimony show clear evidence of elder financial exploitation. The gavel struck again, sharp as lightning. This court rules in favor of Evelyn Harris. All attempts at asset transfer are void. Full guardianship of estate remains with her. Further criminal investigation into Mr. Harris's financial dealings will proceed. The words fell like stones into a still pond. For a moment, silence reigned. Then I heard Ella's soft sob behind me, the kind that carried both relief and sorrow. Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer whispered furiously, but Daniel shoved him aside. His eyes locked on mine, blazing with betrayal. You ruined me, he hissed, voice trembling. You made me small in front of everyone. You think you've won? "You'll regret this." I met his gaze calmly, though inside my chest a storm raged. "I didn't make you small, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "Your choices did." The bailiff moved closer as Daniel's fury grew, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked as though he might lunge, but in the end he only stood there trembling with rage until his lawyer pulled him back down. The judge adjourned, his gavel striking once more. The sound echoed like a final verdict, not only on the case, but on the years of silence, of doubt, of fear. I rose, my knees unsteady, but my back straight. As I walked out of the courtroom, Richard's coat brushed against my legs, and I felt as though he were walking beside me. Outside, the sky was gray, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Reporters swarmed, their questions flying, but I did not stop. Each step down the courthouse stairs felt like a step away from shadow and into light. When I reached the bottom, Ella slipped her hand into mine. Her grip was firm, her voice soft. "You did it, Aunt Evelyn." "You showed them the truth." I looked at her, at the determination in her young eyes, and felt both pride and ache. "No," I said quietly. "He showed them himself." I only refused to hide it. That night, as I sat by the fire with my journal, I wrote one line clear and unwavering. Justice is not loud. It is steady, patient, and when it arrives, it does not need to shout. The fire crackled, warm against the cold outside. For the first time in many months, I felt the weight on my chest lift slightly. Daniel's shadow still lingered, but it no longer towered over me. The truth had stood in open court, and it had not bent. The courtroom was still vibrating with Daniel's outburst when an unexpected sound broke through, the scraping of a chair from the gallery. Heads turned. I turned too, and there, rising with trembling hands, was Alan Barker, Richard's old partner, the man whose name had hovered at the edges of every document, every forged trail Ella and Whitaker had uncovered. His face looked older than I remembered, his shoulders slumped as though carrying decades of regret, yet his eyes burned with something raw. He shuffled forward, his voice hoarse but steady enough to carry. "Your Honor," he began, "I can't keep this secret anymore." Daniel spun around, his expression twisting from anger to alarm. "Alan, sit down," he barked, his voice sharp like a whip. "This isn't your fight." But Alan shook his head, his voice gaining strength. "It has always been mine." I signed the papers. I helped him build the lies, and I can't live with it any longer. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised a hand for silence, eyes narrowing as Alan continued. "Daniel forced me. He said if I didn't sign, he'd expose mistakes I made years ago with Richard's accounts. He dangled ruin over me, and I was too weak to fight back. So I signed. Again and again. Fake valuations, false ledgers. Every document that moved her money into his hands passed under my pen. I sat frozen, my breath caught between disbelief and the strange weight of inevitability. The truth was spilling out, uncoiled at last, and the man delivering it trembled as though unburdening his soul. Daniel slammed his hand against the table, his voice cracking. "Lies! He's lying to save himself. He's a failure, a drunk. He's always been jealous of me. You can't trust a word he says." Alan's eyes flicked to me, then to the judge. He straightened as though summoning the last of his strength. "There's more," he said, his voice firmer now. "Daniel didn't just steal from his mother. He took from Richard's old clients, funds entrusted to the Harris name. He siphoned money meant for widows, pensions, and small businesses. He told me it was temporary, that he'd replace it once his investment succeeded, but they never did." The words fell like hammer blows. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, sharp as shattered glass. My hands gripped the edge of the bench, my knuckles white. Richard's clients, the people he had spent his life serving with honesty. Daniel had not only betrayed me, He had desecrated his father's legacy. For the first time since this battle began, I saw it. True fear in Daniel's eyes. His confidence cracked, and beneath it, panic glimmered. His lips parted, but no words came at first. His skin drained pale, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like the little boy who once clung to my hand in the Christmas service, lost and trembling. Then fury took over. "You coward," he snarled at Alan. "You're just trying to drag me down with you." "None of this would have worked without your signature." Alan's voice broke, but it didn't falter. "Yes, and that's why I'm standing here now, to admit my guilt, to admit I let pride and fear chain me to your schemes, but I won't carry it any longer." He turned to the judge, his hands shaking. "I'll give you every file, every ledger." I kept copies. I was too afraid to destroy them. They'll show exactly what he did. The judge leaned forward, his tone measured. "Mr. Barker, you understand that by admitting this, you implicate yourself in fraud?" Alan nodded slowly, tears brimming in his weary eyes. "I know, and I accept it, but I can't let her." His gaze turned toward me. "Carry the weight of what he's done alone." I felt tears prick my own eyes, though I held them back. My voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "Richard trusted you once, Alan. You failed him. But tonight you gave back a piece of what was lost." Daniel staggered back, his chair screeching against the floor as he stumbled into it. His face was ashen, his hands twitching on the table as though he were trying to hold on to something that was already gone. For once, he had no words, no performance. Only silence stretched between us, broken by the scribble of the court reporter and the low murmur of shocked spectators. The judge struck the gavel, his voice echoing. "This court will recess while Mr. Barker's testimony and evidence are reviewed, but let it be noted, the defendant's network of fraud has been directly corroborated by his own accomplice." The sound of the gavel rang like a final nail driven into Daniel's illusion. His carefully built tower collapsed in that moment, brick by brick, lie by lie. As people shuffled from the courtroom, I remained seated, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of grief and grim relief. I looked at my son, his face pale, eyes darting, his mask shattered. He looked at me too, but there was no anger left in his gaze, only something rawer, closer to despair. For a fleeting second, I almost reached out. Almost. But then I remembered Richard's steady words in his letter. "Do not surrender." And I knew. Compassion did not mean surrender. Understanding did not mean yielding. I rose, smoothing Richard's coat across my shoulders. As I walked past Daniel, I heard his ragged whisper, desperate and hollow. "You were supposed to protect me, Mother." I paused, my hand tightening on the leather of my journal at my side. My voice was quiet, almost tender, but unyielding. "I was supposed to protect what is right, and I have." Then I walked on, leaving him sitting in the wreckage of the lies he had built. The gavel came down one final time, its crack echoing through the courthouse like thunder rolling over a valley. Daniel was ordered into custody, temporary holding until his financial fraud case would go before the grand jury. The bailiff stepped forward, cold steel cuffs closing around his wrists. For the first time, his shoulders slumped, no longer broad with arrogance, but bent under the weight of exposure. His eyes flicked toward me, but there was no rage left in them, only a hollow desperation, as though he were already half a ghost. I stood silently as they led him away. My heart did not leap at his downfall. It sank with a heaviness words could not hold. This was my son, the boy who once clutched my hand at church, who once begged for another bedtime story. And now he was a man in chains, not just of iron, but of his own making. The judge's words still lingered in the air. All property rights remain with Mrs. Evelyn Harris. This court recognizes her full ownership of the Harris estate and affirms the protection of her residence and assets. Those words meant the red brick house, Richard's garden, and the memories that lived in its walls were safe. Yet safety came wrapped in sorrow. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the air was sharp and bright, as though winter itself wanted to cleanse the weight of corruption. Reporters called after me, microphones shoved close, their questions hungry. "Mrs. Harris, how do you feel about your son's arrest? Do you see this as justice?" I said nothing. My silence was my answer. Words could never capture the mixture inside me. Vindication tangled with grief, relief wrapped around loss. I only walked, Richard's coat swaying at my sides, each step a reminder that dignity was not seized by force, but preserved in quiet resolve. That evening, I returned home. The red bricks glistened under a thin sheen of rain, the Christmas lights still dangling though their glow had dimmed. I stepped through the front door and breathed in the familiar scent of cedar floors and faint smoke from the hearth. Ella was waiting in the kitchen, a steaming kettle on the stove. She rose as I entered, her youthful face lit with relief. "It's over," she said softly. "The house is safe. Everything is safe." I moved to the cupboard, taking down the porcelain teapot Richard and I had used every night. As I poured the Earl Grey, the fragrance curled upward, mingling with the damp scent of soil drifting in from the open window. Rain had just passed, and the earth exhaled freshness, carrying with it the promise of renewal. We sat at the table, steam rising between us. Ella's eyes shimmered, her voice trembling with both admiration and something deeper. "You've taught us a lesson, Aunt Evelyn. We'll never forget it. Never take our parents for granted. Never believe pride is worth more than love." Her words pierced me in a way Daniel's fury never could. They carried the weight of generations, the warning that his failure might yet save those who came after him. I smiled faintly, though it was not pride that curved my lips. It was a kind of calm, the peace that comes not from victory, but from survival. "I did what I had to do," I said, "not to punish, but to protect. This house, this garden, Richard's name, they are more than possessions. They are a trust, and I will not let that trust be broken." Ella reached across the table, her small hand covering mine. "You showed us strength isn't loud, it's steady. I'll carry that with me." I closed my eyes briefly, listening to the rainwater dripping from the eaves, the faint crackle of the fire in the other room. Each sound was a reminder that the world moved forward, indifferent to human folly, but generous to those who endured. Later, I stepped into the garden. The roses were bare, their thorns dark with moisture, but I knew spring would coax them back. My fingers brushed the soil, cool and damp, alive beneath the surface. "We're safe, Richard," I whispered into the twilight. "The house, the garden, your memory, I kept them. I could almost feel him beside me, as though the wind carried his breath, as though the earth itself held his hand beneath mine." Inside, Ella had lit candles. Their glow spilled across the walls, warm against the cool night. She sat reading Richard's old ledger, her lips moving as though she were whispering a prayer. As I poured another cup of tea, I thought of Daniel in his cell. The clank of the cuff still echoed in my memory. I wondered if, in that silence, he would finally see the truth. That control is not respect, and power is not love. Perhaps the lesson would come too late for him, but still, it was his to face. I wrote in my journal before bed, my pen steady across the page. Today the court affirmed what I already knew. Dignity cannot be stolen. It must be surrendered. And I did not surrender. The words filled the page like a vow, not of triumph, but of endurance. I closed the journal, placed it on the table beside Richard's letter, and blew out the candle. The room sank into quiet, filled only with the lingering fragrance of tea and the earth after rain. Ella's words echoed in my mind as I drifted toward sleep. We'll never take our parents for granted. Perhaps that was the only victory worth holding, the knowledge that through suffering, a truth had been planted, one that might grow where pride had failed. When I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, not the man raging in court, but the boy clutching my hand in the glow of Christmas candles. My heart ached, but I did not weep. Grief was there, yes, but so was peace. The snow had melted into soft patches across the garden, leaving the ground damp and rich with the promise of spring. I walked slowly among the bare rose bushes, pruning what was dead, leaving space for what would bloom again. Each snip of the shears felt like a quiet vow that endings are never the whole story. The trial was behind me, though its echoes lingered in every whispered phone call, every glance from neighbors who didn't know whether to pity me or praise me. Daniel sat in county holding, awaiting his next hearing. His name had turned from pride to shame in the community, yet I refused to let my life end in bitterness. My grief needed a shape, and I had found it. In Richard's old study, I laid out the first papers for what would become the Richard Harris Scholarship Fund. Ella sat with me, her pen moving swiftly across forms as I dictated. The fund would provide for students who dreamed of higher education, but had no means. Children like the ones Richard once tutored for free in the evenings after long days at the bank. Ella looked up from the forms, her brow furrowed. "You're giving so much, Aunt Evelyn. After everything. Why not just keep it safe for yourself?" I smiled gently, smoothing the paper beneath my hand. Because dignity is not just about defending what is mine. It's about planting something that will outlive me. Richard gave his life to helping others stand tall. This is how his name continues. She nodded, though her eyes softened with something like awe. "Then I'll help you make it real." Later that night, I returned to my journal. The leather cover was worn, edges softened by years of use. It had carried my sorrows and my small joys through seasons of loss and quiet resilience. Tonight, I turned to a fresh page. The ink bled steady and dark as I wrote, "Respect never comes from control. It comes from truth and from kindness." I paused, staring at the words. They seemed simple, but each letter carried the weight of storms, of betrayals, of cold nights waiting for dawn. A memory flickered, Daniel's voice the night he pushed me from the car. "You'll learn respect." He thought cruelty would teach me submission, but the lesson had turned, as all false lessons do. The one abandoned in the rain had become the one who endured. The one who tried to control had become the one undone. The church bell tolled faintly in the distance, its chime weaving through the winter air. I lifted my teacup, the steam curling upward, mingling with the sound. Earl Grey, fragrant and warm, filled my senses. Each sip grounded me, reminding me that rituals, no matter how small, are anchors when storms threaten to sweep us away. Ella entered quietly, holding 2 envelopes. "These came today. One from a family Richard once helped with their mortgage. They said they want to contribute to the scholarship. And one from the Herald, an editorial praising your courage." I set down my tea and opened the first envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "We never forgot how Richard believed in us when no one else would. Now it's our turn to give back." A small check was tucked inside, no fortune, but a beginning. I held it as though it were gold. The second envelope carried words I never sought. Evelyn Harris reminds us that the measure of strength is not in wealth or power, but in the refusal to bow when dignity is at stake. I folded both letters and slipped them into the journal, pressing them between the pages like dried petals, proof that even from brokenness, beauty could be preserved. As the fire in the hearth dwindled to embers, I allowed myself one final reflection. Daniel had believed that leaving me in the rain was his lesson to teach, that fear would bring obedience, that abandonment would shape respect. But the truth was clear now. The real lesson belonged to him, and to all who forget the weight of filial duty, who confuse control with love, who mistake pride for strength. I whispered into the quiet, almost as though speaking to Daniel himself. You thought you were the teacher, but you were the student all along. And the lesson was never mine to carry. It was yours. The candles flickered as though in agreement, their flames bowing before the stillness. I breathed deeply, letting the scent of tea and damp earth settle into me. Before I closed the journal for the night, I wrote one last line, steady and unshaken. Storms reveal what roots remain. Mine held, his did not. The bell rang again in the distance, marking the hour. I leaned back, the leather journal warm in my lap, and lifted my teacup one last time. The taste was steady, familiar, unchanged, even after all the upheaval. And with that final sip, I knew the story was not of what had been taken from me, but of what I had kept, my dignity, Richard's legacy, and the truth that outlasts even betrayal. Daniel's downfall was not the ending. The ending was this quiet moment where the world was whole again, and the lesson stood unshaken. Thank you for being a part of my journey. Leave your comments on your reflection.